Hey, everybody. So, which do you think is greater? Somebody who does something because they have to do it. They're doing something good, but it's an obligation, it's required of them, and they do it. As opposed to somebody who does something and they're not required to do it, they do it on their own, of their own volition. Which is greater? The person who does it because they have to, or the person who does it because they want to do it? They just step forward and they do it. So intuitively, the latter sounds a lot better and it sounds a lot greater. It's altruistic, didn't have to do it, they came through. But interestingly enough, Jewish tradition does not look at it that way. And we just had in this past week in Daf Yomi, as a side point, it made mention of a famous line in the Gemara in the Talmud, which says, Gadol hametzuva va'ose yoter mimisha ena metzuva va'ose. Greater is the person who's commanded to do something and he does it. That person, that act is greater than the person who's not commanded to do the thing and does it. The obligation is considered greater. Now, why? Why would we look at it that way? So the traditional answer, what the commentaries usually say is, when you're told you got to do something, so what happens? Your back gets up. Initially, it's like, don't tell me what to do. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, it kicks in. When you're metzuva, when you're commanded to do something, when you have to do something, the knee-jerk reaction is, don't tell me what to do, I don't want to do it, let me think of ways how I can get out of my obligation. And so therefore, when a person overcomes that, that's a greater reward because the person who does it out of a volunteer and doesn't have to do it, so they're not up against that opposition, and therefore their reward is less. The second way to look at it, however, is, let's face it, the greatest things in life only happen because you feel an obligation to it. It's nice to do things out of a sense of volunteerism, and I want to do this. But the bottom line is that the only way that things really, really get done is because a person feels, I have to do this. I have to do this. That creates the consistency. That creates day in and day out, I got to do this. And so this is the difference, for instance, to illustrate between being a parent and a grandparent. People always say, oh, being a grandparent is so much fun. There's that bumper sticker. If I knew how much fun being a grandparent was, I would have done this first. But the fact of the matter is yes, it's more fun to be a grandparent, but you don't necessarily get that same deep sense of satisfaction that you do with children. You see, when it comes to grandparents, I have a little bit of experience of this, thank God. We'll come through for my kids and watch the grandchildren. I might even change a diaper here and there, and I have. But it's not like as a parent where I have to do it. I do it out of choice, but the bottom line is when all is said and done, this is my son's kid, this is my daughter's kid, these are their kids. I could just pass them off, have a little fun with them, help out a little bit, but bottom line, okay, now you take over. I've done my work with you kids, now you do it with your kids. And so, yes, it's fun to be a grandparent, but the deepest, greatest pleasure really comes from children. And even though there's tremendous nachas, there's tremendous pleasure from grandchildren, really on a certain level, it is a function of the fact that this is the offspring of my child. And so the Talmud says, Lafum tsara agra. According to the pain is the reward, is the pleasure. According to the pain is the pleasure. When you raise children, you're obligated. You have to be there. It's on. You always have to be on. It's consistent. It's constant. It's all the time. Even when you don't feel like doing it, getting up in the middle of the night. I don't get up in the middle of the night too often for my grandchildren. Here and there they sleep over, okay, but generally not. But with your kids you do. And as a result, the pleasure is much greater and deeper and more meaningful in the long run. So, yeah, don't get me wrong. Volunteerism, doing something that you're not obligated to do it's wonderful. It's wonderful. You get a great feeling when you do that. You get a great feeling as when you're a recipient of someone who does something that they weren't obligated to do it. It's wonderful. We're not saying it's not good. But the bottom line is, ultimately, for anything to really big, in a big sense, to get done and to accomplish, that only happens when you're mitzvah. That only what happens when you're commanded, when you have that sense of obligation. I got to do this. I have no choice but to do it. And that's why the deeper, greater feeling of satisfaction and ultimate pleasure is with those things that you feel an obligation that you have to do versus those things that you just feel like doing. Being a grandparent's great. It's wonderful. It's fun. Everyone knows that. But the bottom line is, being a parent is really, in a real sense, a much deeper and more meaningful pleasure. Have a good Shabbat.